Video games can never be art. No one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great poets, filmmakers, and novelists. No video gamer now living will survive long enough to experience the medium as an art form. These are the words of iconic film reviewer Roger Ebert, taken from his 2010 article, Video Games Can Never Be Art, an opinion piece wherein he respectfully explains why he doesn't believe video games can ever live up to being themselves works of art. Hi, I'm Sam, and welcome to Late to the Party, a new look at old media. The Oxford definition of tabula rasa is the absence of preconceived ideas or predetermined goals. Simply put, it comes from the Latin term for a clean slate. In engaging with the media that no one has previous knowledge of, whether that be video games or otherwise, the consumer is left to their own devices on how to feel and think about what they experience and form their own ideas about what's in front of them. The 2015 video game, The Beginner's Guide, flips that idea of tabula rasa on its head, and, rather, is presented as something it's not before giving the player the chance to come to their own conclusions of what it actually might be. But before we delve into the Beginner's Guide, we need to go back a couple of years and talk about its predecessor, the Stanley Parable. In late 2013, the full release of the Stanley Parable was published onto Steam, where curious players were welcomed to a unique project, an experimental game involving the player's direct decision-making and the impact those decisions would have within the narrative of the game. The player character, Stanley, is presented as an office drone, startled by the fact that everyone has abruptly disappeared. Encouraged to get up and investigate by the narrator, the player themselves now have full choice over whatever they deem Stanley to do. If you start looking around, our guide will continue with his narration. Feel like standing still? The narrator will speak up. Have a strange fascination with the broom closet? He will openly admit his genuine confusion.
Are you really still in the broom closet? Standing around doing nothing? Why? Please offer me some explanation here. I'm genuinely confused.
If you take the door on the right, the player is presented with a narration that keeps up with them. Pretty much whatever you decide to do, the narrator will speak up. The Stanley Parable is all about players' choice. Whatever path the player wishes to take, the narrative is going to go somewhere with it. Even if that somewhere can happen to lead the narrator into absolute bewilderment trying to keep up with the player's radical choices.
But in his eagerness to prove that he is in control of the story and no one gets to tell him what to do, Stanley leapt from the platform and plunged to his death. Good job, Stanley. Everyone thinks you are very powerful.
Often paired with a lively yet often sardonic wit, he goes along with the player every step of their obedient or defiant ways, leading to a great deal of unique endings the player can end up at. Some uplifting, some foreboding, and some that are downright fourth wall breaking.
He then praised the game for its insightful and witty commentary into the nature of video game structure and its examination of structural narrative tropes. So, now that you're here, what do you think? Isn't this a fun and unique place to be? Why don't we take a minute just to drink it all in?
But whereas this was the point of the Stanley Parable, its successor, The Beginner's Guide, is all about player interpretation, and, at least to me, is incredibly self-reflective. Released just 2 years later, The Beginner's Guide is all about how individual people perceive video games and creative works in general, and how we personally connect with them, often in ways we never imagined we could. Upon reading a particular review of it from one of my favorite creators, I had to immediately pick it up, and to my surprise, all within an hour and a half, I went through an emotional journey that I can only describe as my own exercise in grief. This is The Beginner's Guide. The game starts with a narration from the game's writer/creator, Davey Wreden, taking us on a journey through several games an indie developer friend named Coda created within the 3-year period. After being inspired by Coda's work, Davey tells the player that his goal in showcasing these projects to us is try to see past the games themselves and construct who his friend is as a person through the games he creates. Throughout the journey, Davey takes us through every game Coda created between 2008 and 2011. There are 16 in total he takes us through, all created by Coda and gathered into a chronological order by our narrator/guide. They are all, for the most part, incomplete game ideas that an individual indie developer might be making. Walking through games that were long forgotten, simply abandoned, or were just moved on from. According to Davey, Coda never intended for any of these games to be revealed publicly, something the player should keep in mind for later.
This is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable, whether it means anything if no one can get through it. And I would always defend that, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible?
As Davey goes on to show us more and more games, he describes what he thought may be going through Coda's mind as he was developing these little vertical slices.
It is less advanced than the previous game, but actually it seems to be more focused, more complete. Coda's trying to give it a unique voice rather than simply basing it on a pre-existing trope.
The chapter Notes is actually the first of these games Davey actually played, having seen Davey previously working on it at a game jam, an event where game devs compete to make the most enjoyable game in a very short time frame. This is about halfway through the beginner's guide, and it's at this juncture that Davey's narration can start to feel questionable, as he's quick to tell us just how much he's latched on to Coda's creations.
I think this is why I always liked Coda's games so much, is because it felt like they let me have that connection. I felt as though he was inviting me personally into his world. And then I feel less lonely too.
Maybe Coda, as an amateur developer, was just using these spaces as sort of a practice. Perhaps they were never meant to be released to the public because they were just that, tools for improvement. They didn't need to make sense or be more than what they were.
Before you move on, you get to pause. Just for a moment, a few seconds to reflect on and let go of the events that led you here.
The remaining chapters now, thematically, veer into something else entirely. Porn Stars Die 2, or Escape according to the game files, slowly takes us through several different versions of a small, homey prison cell, using the same assets in different ways with each version, ultimately ending with a phone call to your past self who is still within that prison. Davey trips up with his interpretation, thinking it's Coda needing someone to talk to other than himself. But it's really, in the last line, that emotions can stir. House is the next chapter. The player enters a modest home during a snow-covered night and follows the homeowner's instructions on what to clean in the house, with a small conversational piece happening between each chore. There's a certain piece to this game that can't be denied. The music is calm, the crude but effective homeowner's dialogue has a certain comforting charm to it, and the objective is quite simple. Even Davey said that Coda was at a point in his life where he was very happy and smiling a lot. But it's in Davey's praise that the last line from the homeowner can easily be missed.
But, of course, it can't last. The music stops, your companion is gone, it's time to leave.
Lecture takes place in a self-help class, and once the player is in the eyes of the speaker, you are given options on what to say, with the more genuine answers in yellow, while the more outlandish, cynical, and crude answers are a bit grayed out. It ultimately doesn't matter what one chooses to say, as all that will happen is the game continuing. The vile eye in the background and its accompanying screams don't matter, even as the speaker praises the idea of perfection. Theater is very short, consisting of one short dialogue tree, followed by what can only be assumed as the director instructing the player to run as iron bars block their way back. Davey believes this to be an unhealthy withdrawal attempt by Coda, and thinks him to be isolating himself within his depression. The next three chapters are where the beginner's guide takes its emotional turn. The chapter Mobius Trip invites you to play literally blind, though it is impossible to do this if done this way. The only way to stop an oncoming collision is to talk to one NPC with truth written on their head. If Davy's interpretation is correct, and these dialogues are Coda's conversations to himself, this is where it starts to become obvious that Coda may not have the same passion for games that Davy does. This is highlighted in the accompanying chapter, Island. While a lot more calm in nature, the conversation tree is still pretty similar, emphasizing the emptiness Coda feels when it comes to game creation. A similar two-door puzzle we see throughout our journey leads to a conversation where the player must actually lie and tell the unseen questioner that their passion for game development is always worth it and never causes grief. While Davy is left uncomfortable at the assumed dialogue of Coda, the walls slowly break away, revealing recycled lines from previous games we were shown, with the last wall having one easily missable phrase that means more than the first-time playthroughers may realize. The last wall breaks away, and we see the same homey prison cell from before, only briefly seeing a crying figure before we cut to black. Then, there's the chapter known as The Machine. This part of the episode, funny enough, took me the longest amount of time to write. And to properly talk about it, I have to bring up another unexpected project. Released in 2020, Bo Burnham's Netflix special, Inside, shows a hilarious yet foreboding look into modern American society through the lens of a stand-up comedian who is going through his own mental struggles. The entire special, from the script, lighting, directing, music, and everything in between, was done by Bo himself. But the thing that sets this apart from the other comic specials is the small portions of Bo's creative process we get to see. And while the special is deserving of every award it received, this is where the human side of content creation is shown. Personally, I see these moments of frustration, disappointment, and rage-filled agony, and I understand it so well. The creative process can be a wonderful, joyous journey through one's own imagination, insights, and thought processes. That feeling of flow when everything is coming together just right and pen is meeting paper with a frantic, thought-driven fury is nothing short of sheer joy. Until it isn't. When those little articulate thoughts and well-written theses stop, when those well-imagined drafts aren't coming together in that perfect harmony you know they should, it is painful. It is painful when one's own mind stops steering you towards the end picture you can so clearly see, and instead leaves you with a rage only confusion can inflict. It is painful when the machine stops working. When it comes to the Machine chapter, while it wouldn't be fair to me to assume what Coda/the creator was thinking, I can offer my own interpretation. Content creation, personally, is very gratifying to me. Make no mistake, I'm aware how minuscule my channel is, but the moment I get to publish one of my videos, it fills me with a sense of joyous pride. The struggle of writing, editing, and learning new lessons is always seemingly worth it, but it doesn't mean the struggle isn't there. Often, I'll get a moment of incredible inspiration, hurrying away to keyboard to write down my thoughts and interpretations, only to have that same inspiration crash and burn when my thoughts come to a standstill, and I find myself staring into the blinking cursor on the screen, dumbfounded. When it feels like the machine stops working, it can feel like everything is at a halt, and that's when self-doubt inevitably tries to creep in. And I think we all feel that way sometimes. The dialogue here, no matter what is chosen, ends with the player taking the same weapon from an earlier chapter and systematically destroying several other previous chapters, deleting them in a shroud of white space before ultimately firing upon the machine itself. Whatever point Coda was trying to make here, Davy ignores it and simply tells us his perspective and how he would gain gratification by showing off Coda's games to others.
When they told me how much they enjoyed his games, it was the best feeling. It was the absolute best feeling. It made me feel so happy. So beautifully, beautifully happy.
Eventually, the world cuts to black, and we come to the penultimate chapter of the beginner's guide. Tower is the last game Coda sent Davy to play, although this time, it was directly messaged via private file sharing to Davy, meaning that he was originally the only one who could play it. And it soon becomes clear why it feels so cold and distant. Some previously missable cracks in Davy's narration start widening.
And to be fair, it's not like this is the first game that's needed some modification to be playable. Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end.
It becomes quickly apparent that Davy may not be telling us the full story, and in retrospect, his unreliable narration becomes a bit more obvious. And it's in openly admitting that he's been modifying Coda's games that he offhandedly reveals more about himself than Coda. And this all comes to a crescendo at the end of Tower. To get to its conclusion, Davy must guide the player through 3 impossible tasks: an invisible maze, a random 6-digit code, and an inaccessible door. To the outsider, this might just look like another game of Coda's, but as Davy guides you more and more, it's undeniable that this last level wasn't made for anyone but Davy, and as we proceed to put in the final code and drop down into an empty room, the true nature of Tower is revealed.
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you. I don't think I ever told you this, but when I took your work and I was showing it to people, it actually felt... it felt as though I were responsible for something important and valuable. And the people who played them, they treated me like I was important. They really listened and cared about what I had to say. Even though I was showing your work, I felt good about myself. Finally, for a moment while I had that, I liked myself. And then you stopped, and I didn't have anything left to show people. I just had to be with myself. And as soon as that happened, there was no feeling at all. Nothing. Less than nothing. What does that mean? I'm afraid that I did something really stupid because I don't like myself. That's why I'm releasing this collection of your work, is because I haven't been able to find any other way to reach you. I've tried everything. And so a part of me has hope that if I put this compilation out into the world, and if I put my name on it, that maybe enough people will play it so that it'll find its way to you, so that I can tell you that I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. If I apologize to you truly and deeply, will you start making games again? Please, I need to feel okay with myself again. And I always felt okay as long as I had your work to see myself in. I mean, is something wrong with me? Because I know that I did an awful thing, and I'm doing it again right now. Like, I'm showing people your work, but I can't stop myself from doing it. That's how badly I need to feel something again, like I'm an addict. There has to be something wrong with me. Can I apologize? What if I tell you I was wrong? Will that work? Will that fix it? I don't know. I don't think it will, but there's nothing else that I can do. Just tell me what you want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing and you put into your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. And I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm fading, and all I want is to know that I'm going to be okay.
After Davy's absolute breakdown, we are warped to one last level, the epilogue. Here, we hear Davy one last time lamenting his state of self. The level we are walking through goes through several different environments while Davy continues to narrate his thoughts. Eventually, Davy admits that he needs to work on himself, and seemingly walks away, leaving the player to their own thoughts.
I have a lot that I need to make up for, and so I'm just gonna... Okay.
It's here, wandering in the dark, unknown halls, that we are left in silence. And it's in this silence that the beginner's guide becomes something more for me. You see, games don't need to be bombastic to be impactful. Sometimes it's in this grave silence that the impact is the loudest. This is highlighted by something most players will probably miss entirely. After completing the game, an option is unlocked that gives the player the ability to turn Davy's narration completely off. Meaning that these games you are now playing through are being played without any context of any kind, in a sense, the playable state in which Coda would have left them. But the true beauty of this option is the fact that you don't get it until after your first playthrough, meaning the player, by proxy, already has had their perspective shifted to one specific way, and has their view of Coda's project tainted, for lack of a better term. The question then becomes, how does the player interpret what they are experiencing? To me, these seem like the projects of a game dev just trying new things, developing their style and getting more and more experience with the skill that they are crafting, and going through the inevitable hardships that come with learning such things, and ultimately wanting to move on from them. But I can never unexperience Davy's story, never unhear what he told. That sense of tabula rasa I mentioned in the beginning is now taken over by innatism, and no matter how you want to feel about the rest of the game, Davy has already poisoned your perception, just like he did when he showed Coda's games to others in an attempt to almost live vicariously through Coda's projects. In playing through the beginner's guide without Davy's guidance, the player is left to their own devices, free from the former's meddling, but cursed with his perception all the same. It's a beautiful chaos this way, giving the player the chance to not only see Coda's games for all their clunky goodness, but also insights into just how much Davy had a hand in the first playthrough. The first maze isn't skipped, the stairway takes an eternity to crawl up, and you're actually stuck in the quiet prison cell for a couple of hours. But as you go on, you see just how much Tower was designed specifically for Davy. Tower can never be completed without his interference, and the player is left at a dead end of either a mostly invisible maze or a completely inaccessible door. Coda knew that Davy would modify his creation to proceed to some unintended endgame that must have existed somewhere within the level. If not, as Davy said, what would be the point? Tower wasn't for anyone but Davy, and in releasing these games, missed the point entirely. Every morning, not in recent days, I see my friend who has a disability. It's so hard for him just to do a high five, his arm stiff with muscles reaching out to mine. Now, thinking of him, I can't watch this stuff and find it interesting. Whoever creates this stuff has no idea what pain is whatsoever. These are the roughly translated words of acclaimed animation legend Hayao Miyazaki after being shown an example of AI-created animation. While I'm not here to discuss the prevalence of AI in our culture, I always find myself remembering his last line. Whoever created this has no idea what pain is. There can be no denying that pain played a huge part in the beginner's guide. While the plot may be fictitious, the themes of anxiety, self-doubt, human error, heartbreak, pain, and regret are all parts of our lives, whether we want to acknowledge them or not. All within roughly minutes, examples from those themes from my own life echo through my mind. Memories of pain and lost friendships, regrets, dark periods. That is powerful. Creating an experience that not only reminds the player of their own life, but makes them reflect on the choices they've made, can seldom be put into words. My experiences are just that, mine. Someone else may very well have a completely different reaction to this game, and that's the point. The beginner's guide is all about how we perceive the content someone creates. The twist towards the end is very heartbreaking, unexpected, and sadly realistic. A few weeks after Roger Ebert penned "Video Games Can Never Be Art," he followed it up with another article, one conceding to the opinion of gamers themselves, and their many surprisingly respectful and thoughtful responses to Ebert's piece. "Okay kids, play on my lawn," was Ebert's overall response to the masses, admitting his obvious ignorance of video games and gaming culture, concluding that a poem should not mean, but be. I had to be prepared to agree that gamers can have an experience that, for them, is art. I don't know what gamers can learn about another human being that way, no matter how much they learn about human nature. I don't know if they can be inspired to transcend themselves. Perhaps they can. How can I say? I may be wrong, but if I'm not willing to play a video game to find that out, I should say so. I have books to read and movies to see. I was a fool for mentioning video games in the first place. The Beginner's Guide is one of those games that needs to be played to be properly experienced. Though I can take you chapter by chapter through Davy's journey, I think that it's up to players to think for themselves on what this project means to them. The emotion each chapter can unleash will probably differ from person to person, but I think that's the real beauty of it. No one player will have the exact same reaction, because when escapism is peppered in realism, it's left to our own life experiences and interpretations to tell us exactly what we are being presented. Thank you for watching this episode of Late to the Party. If you enjoy my content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel so I have a better chance of YouTube's algorithm gracing me with its favor. Comment down below if you've experienced The Beginner's Guide in all its emotional splendor. I promise not all of these episodes would be this depressing, but I think it's important to share why we choose to connect with these works of art in the first place. Remember though, if you're late to the party, it's still going on, so you might as well enjoy yourself. I'll see you next time.